Hey, I miss you and I hope you're doing well. This is such a crazy time and I hope you're doing okay with your family and you're navigating through all of this home learning stuff as best as you can. The good news is you made it through your first biology test online and we're moving into the next section. And so before we get into the next group of sections that we're going to cover, I want to go back and talk to you about some of the things that we've been learning. So we've been covering the animal kingdom, and we started off talking about members of the phylum Porifera, which are basically sponges. And sponges are pretty cool. They're very, very simple, and there are different kinds of sponges, but in general, they typically are asymmetrical, meaning they don't really have any way that you can divide them into equal halves. You could argue that maybe like a barrel sponge or whatever, you could do that, but most of the sponges are considered to be asymmetrical and the most basic type of animal there is. Then we moved in to covering the phylum Cnidaria. And cnidarians include things like corals, sea anemones, jellyfish, hydras. I didn't list them all. There are Portuguese men of war. There are some really cool ones called Cassiopeia. If you're bored, you can look those up because they're really cool. And I've swam with them, so it's pretty scary actually because they're like jellyfish, but they live upside down. And so really neat stuff. But anyway, the cnidarians, they have what we call radial symmetry. And I wanted to make sure that I take a moment on video to talk about what radial symmetry is versus bilateral. And so we'll talk about radial now, we'll get to bilateral in a minute. But let's just say that this is the underside of a jellyfish, or maybe you're looking down on a sea anemone. If you have a cnidarian, it's going to be round, like there's no clear head or tail end, and you can divide it in many ways. So I've got a marker here, and so you could divide it like straight down the middle here, or maybe here or here. Like, well, just imagine all those lines actually intersect, but you get the idea. I could draw like an infinite number of lines and I'd still have two halves that are basically the same. And so that's what it means when we have radial symmetry. So all of these, like the jellyfish, the hydra, the sea anemones, coral, things like that, those are going to have radial symmetry. Another characteristic of cnidarians is that they have the stinging cells with the tentacles. I didn't write that on there, but also they exist in one of two stages. Sometimes they'll just stay in the polyp stage their entire life, and that's with the tentacles pointing up. And some polyps are stalked and they can actually move around a little bit, but some are embedded and stay in the same place. And then there's the medusa stage, which is what we typically think of when we think of a jellyfish, and that is free to move around. And so different types of cnidarians might alternate between these two stages, or they may stay in the polyp stage their entire life. It just depends on the specific one. But they do have this going on for that phylum. And another thing about the cnidarians is they're very, very simple. And they do have sort of like what we would say is a digestive system. It's more like a sac where they eat food and then it gets digested. But then there's only one opening. And so the food that they eat, like whatever they're not absorbing, has to come back out of their, quote, mouth. And so like on a jellyfish, it would just be like the underside of the jellyfish. So very, very primitive, very, very simple. And then we're going to move on. Like you already took your quiz and your test on all of those things. And the next thing that we're going to move on to is the three different types of worms. So the first type of worm that we're going to cover would be in phylum Platyhelminthes. Yes, it's a long word, but it's called Platyhelminthes. And this is like the simple term for this would be the flatworms. And so their bodies tend to be flat and they have bilateral symmetry. And so they have a definite head end and a tail end. And so I'm going to draw a worm really quick. Okay, and I'm going to put, they don't really have eyes like we would think of eyes, but they have what we call eye spots. And I drew his body a little kind of curvy because they kind of move around all the time. But you can, if you drew a line across this way, you would not have two equal halves because there is a definite head end and a tail end. However, let me change colors of markers here. Okay, if you drew a line like down the center assuming you could put them all still, you would have like a left side and a right side that was basically the same. And so that's what we mean by bilateral symmetry. There's like one line that you can draw and you'll have a left and a right half that are very, very similar. But that's basically the only way you could draw a line down the middle and have good symmetry. And so that's bilateral symmetry. Remember, bi means two, just like a bicycle has two wheels. Okay, so all of the members of Platyhelminthes have bilateral symmetry. And then there are three basic types that are covered in your book. And the free-living type are called planarians, and they usually live in the ocean, and they're very, very beautiful. We're going to see a video later this week about those, and they're so pretty, and they're really frilly, and they're graceful, and they're awesome. The other types, not so awesome. The other types are parasitic, like tapeworms. You might have heard of that with like your dog, or even people can get tapeworms, as well as flukes. Those can cause very bad diseases, the flukes especially. So another thing though that makes them similar to the cnidarians is that they only have one digestive tract opening. Most of the Platyhelminthes have a sac, like a digestive sac, where they'll ingest food, digest what they want, and then they have to spit the remains back out because they only have the one opening. That means that they cannot continually eat. They have to like eat, and then they'll digest it, and then they'll spit it back out, and then at that point they can take in more nutrition. And then they don't really have a brain. I have down here that they have a primitive, quote, brain. It's really a bunch of nerve cells, and they have two nerve cords running down their body. So what's coming up this week is, now that you've done this introductory video where I'm tying Porifera and cnidarians to the next thing that we're doing, which is Platyhelminthes, you're going to answer just a few questions following the link. And then tomorrow you're going to read the section on Platyhelminthes, which is 23.4 in your textbook, answer questions on that. And then I think Wednesday I have a really cool video for you to watch and some more questions, and then you'll take a quiz on Thursday. And if you haven't heard, you do not have school on Friday, April 10th, because it's Good Friday. So that's some good news for you. And like I said at the beginning, I hope you are doing really well. I'm really enjoying seeing your prayer requests. I've been praying for you. Continue to submit those prayer requests, and know that I'm really hoping for the best for all of us, and I'm hoping we can get back to normal really soon. Keep doing what you're doing and trying. I appreciate the people who are turning in their work every single day. You are awesome, and keep up the great job.